And at that time, think about it, in the 80s, it was a Wild West. So we added a little extra sauce on that, and just had a blast.
You ate a bedpan there at one point. Right to the head.
If you missed WF in 1998, I am sorry. Not in a polite way. In a genuine, you missed the most electric year in wrestling history kind of way. Because 1998 was not just a good year for the WF, it was the year everything changed. The year a scrappy 2-hour television show went to war with a billion-dollar media machine and actually won. The year professional wrestling stopped being a niche hobby for a specific kind of fan and became a full-blown national obsession that teenagers, adults, and first-time viewers could not stop talking about. And if nobody ever walked you through exactly how all of it happened and why it still matters, that ends right now. Because 1998 deserves to be explained from the very beginning. If you are enjoying this breakdown so far, go ahead and hit that hype button on this video right now. It takes 2 seconds, it costs nothing, and it genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Now back to 1998, because it is about to get very good. How did one single year turn professional wrestling into the most talked about television on the air, bring in millions of new viewers, and flip an entire industry completely on its head? For nearly 2 years before 1998 arrived, the WF had been losing. Not close losses either. WCW Monday Nitro had been beating Raw in the television ratings week after week after week. Ted Turner had enormous money behind his operation. He had veteran stars that audiences already loved and would follow anywhere. He had the New World Order storyline running red hot and generating genuine mainstream buzz. He had expanded Monday Nitro to a 3-hour broadcast that made the WWF's 2-hour show look modest by comparison. Meanwhile, the WWF roster felt thinner and the storylines felt older. WrestleMania 13 had pulled the lowest pay-per-view buy rate in the entire franchise's history. The WF was bleeding viewers, revenue, and confidence all at once. Things were not just difficult, they were genuinely frightening for everyone inside that company. Something had to change or there might not be a company left to save. The WF's answer to all of that losing was not a desperate panic move. It was a calculated, patient rebuild from the inside out. Vince McMahon scrapped the old cartoonish good versus evil format that had defined the company for over a decade and replaced it with something rawer, faster, more real. The product became serialized crash television, morally complicated characters who felt like actual human beings rather than cartoon heroes. Storylines that made you feel like you genuinely had to tune in next week or risk missing something you could never rewind and catch later. That creative shift built the Attitude Era, and 1998 was the year it fully and completely detonated in front of the entire country all at once. The moment everyone points to, the moment that proved beyond any doubt that the tide had turned, came on April 13th, 1998. Monday Night Raw broadcast live from Philadelphia. For 95 consecutive weeks, the WWF had been sitting in second place. 95 weeks of losing to the same show every single Monday night. And then on that night in Philadelphia, Raw pulled a 4.6 overall rating, Nitro pulled a 4.2, first place. First time in nearly 2 years, that 95-week streak was finished. And what broke it was not a big celebrity appearance or a pre-announced surprise moment. It was pure storytelling. It was the electric, unresolved tension between a rebellious working-class champion named Steve Austin and the corporate chairman who despised everything Austin represented and stood for. The Raw that night was tight, purposeful, and brilliantly structured. 2 full hours of escalating drama that made Nitro's bloated 3-hour format look exhausting by comparison. From that night, WCW would only win the ratings 8 more times before collapsing. The war had a new leader, but to truly understand why April 13 hit so hard, you have to travel back a few months earlier. Because the WWF had already done something extraordinary to build the foundation. They spent $3 million on Mike Tyson. Let that land for a moment. $3 million paid to a suspended boxing champion who had bitten a man's ear off in his most recent high-profile fight, brought in to serve as the special guest enforcer for the main event of WrestleMania 14. It was a gamble that made many people inside and outside the company extremely nervous. Interestingly, WCW's Eric Bischoff had actually been approached first with the same proposal. He declined. Bischoff was concerned about Tyson's public image, his previous felony conviction, and the ongoing Turner corporate merger, creating caution throughout the organization. Bischoff said no. McMahon said yes. That single decision redirected the trajectory of professional wrestling. The brilliance was in how Tyson was introduced to the WWF audience. Rather than presenting him as a passive celebrity guest smiling politely for the cameras, the WWF MJF booked Steve Austin to interrupt Tyson's announcement on Raw. Austin came out to the ring, got directly in Tyson's face, verbally torn into the boxing champion, flipped him the double middle finger, and ignited a chaotic pull-apart brawl that appeared on news programs around the world the following morning. One segment on a wrestling show. That is all it required. By standing chest to chest without flinching against the most physically feared man on the planet, Austin made a statement that went far beyond professional wrestling. He crossed over from wrestling star into genuine mainstream cultural icon. The mainstream world had noticed the WWF for the first time in years, and it would not look away. WrestleMania 14 arrived on March 29, 1998 in Boston. Throughout the main event, Tyson played both sides with real subtlety, taking quiet digs at Austin and coming close to costing him the championship on several occasions. But when the referee was taken out of the action, Austin hit Shawn Michaels with the Stone Cold Stunner. Tyson slid into position, counted the fall, declared Austin the new champion, and then knocked Michaels unconscious when the former champion got in his face. The arena held 19,028 people. The North American buy rate reached 730,000. The Attitude Era was no longer approaching on the horizon. It had arrived completely. That WrestleMania was the end of something major as much as it was a beginning. Shawn Michaels had entered that Boston arena already a broken man. 2 months earlier, on January 18th at the Royal Rumble, Michaels competed in a casket match against The Undertaker. Barely 5 minutes into the contest, he took a back body drop over the top rope, and his lower spine landed directly onto the hard wooden edge of the casket. Multiple discs herniated. One ruptured completely. He somehow finished the remaining 15 minutes on pure adrenaline and pride. He wrestled WrestleMania 14 on that completely destroyed spine and then stepped away from in-ring competition for over 4 years. The forced absence was a genuine loss for the company's athletic product in the short term, but looking back, it likely saved his life. Michaels was dealing with severe dependency on painkillers, other prescription drugs, and cocaine throughout that period. The relentless, punishing schedule of a full-time touring champion would almost certainly have proved fatal had he stayed on the road. The break forced a completely different life. He returned in 2002, healthy, spiritually grounded, and ready for a second chapter that many fans consider even more impressive than everything that came before it. His departure also forced the immediate reinvention of D-Generation X. On the Raw right after WrestleMania 14, Triple H assumed leadership of the group. He pulled in X-Pac and the New Age Outlaws, Billy Gunn and Road Dogg. This new version of DX was louder, more outrageous, funnier than the original. They shifted from a niche heel act into a massive fan-favorite merchandise phenomenon overnight. The chants were enormous in every building. DX gear sold out constantly. They were the second most popular act in the entire company by summer. The toughest challenge for that incarnation of DX arrived in their summer feud with The Rock's Nation of Domination. This rivalry was the development environment that turned both Triple H and The Rock from mid-card fixtures into legitimate main event stars. The matches were physical and hard-fought. The promos crackled with genuine intensity. The weekly competition between these two factions gave Raw a powerful secondary engine running underneath the main event picture every single week, keeping viewers engaged at every level of the card. However, not everything from that feud holds up well in retrospect. On July 6, 1998, DX performed a parody of the Nation that went far beyond acceptable boundaries, including the use of theatrical blackface. Nation member D'Lo Brown reflected decades later that the segment was completely unnecessary. The legitimate heat between the factions, the athletic chemistry, the personal friction between these performers was already more than capable of drawing viewers and filling arenas on its own merit. The parody crossed a line that should not have been crossed. It stands as the outer limit of how far the Attitude Era pushed things, and it is correctly criticized whenever the subject comes up. The Nation responded with a physical beatdown the following week, and the feud continued, but that episode remains a genuine blemish on an otherwise compelling rivalry. What that rivalry absolutely accomplished, despite its uglier moments, was complete the making of The Rock. You could watch it happening week by week in real time. The Nation period was where Dwayne Johnson located the character fully and completely. The arrogance that somehow had warmth inside it. The catchphrases delivered with the precision of a comedian who knows exactly when the punchline should land. The ability to make an entire arena react with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a slight pause. He was leveling up publicly in front of millions of viewers every single week. The competition of that summer sharpened him into something the audience could sense was fundamentally different. The trash talk was noticeably sharper, the confidence was bigger, the presence in that ring was undeniable. Watching The Rock in the summer of 1998 is like watching someone discover who they are and deciding to be nothing else. That is rare. In professional wrestling, it almost never happens in public like that. Running alongside all of this was a completely different kind of story. Darker, more theatrical. The Undertaker and his fictional disfigured younger half-brother Kane, managed by the scheming Paul Bearer, moved through 1998 in a gothic soap opera that existed in sharp contrast to the gritty modern corporate energy everywhere else on the show. Their relationship swung between violent sibling hatred and dangerous temporary alliance, depending on who was manipulating. McMahon eventually maneuvered both brothers into a joint attack on Steve Austin, producing a triple threat match at the Breakdown pay-per-view, where the only way to win was to pin the champion. Both brothers pinned Austin simultaneously. The title was vacated. When McMahon then refused to grant the belt to either man and insulted them openly, both of them turned on him and fractured his ankle. The supernatural and the corporate had fused into one chaotic, unmissable story. Before we get to the peak of the year, we need to spend proper time on the 4 weeks that defined what Raw had become. In the autumn of 1998, Austin and McMahon produced 4 consecutive episodes of television that people still quote word for word today. Each week was a direct escalation of the week before it, and the pace of it was relentless. On September 28 in Detroit, following the Breakdown finish that stripped Austin of his title, McMahon prepared a ceremony to award the vacant championship. Austin arrived by driving a Red Wings-themed Zamboni directly to the ringside area, climbed off the vehicle, and attacked McMahon in front of a crowd that could not believe what they were seeing. Austin was arrested. Undertaker and Kane then attacked McMahon separately and fractured his ankle with the steel steps. The following week, with McMahon recovering in a local medical facility, Mankind visited to cheer him up, bringing Yerple the Clown and introducing his famous sock puppet. Later that same night, Austin snuck in, disguised as a doctor, attacked McMahon with a bedpan, and assaulted his already injured foot while McMahon screamed. The next week, McMahon drove his brand new Corvette to the arena as a show of corporate strength. Austin drove a cement truck out and filled the car's entire interior with concrete. McMahon threatened to fire him. Austin dared him to do it. McMahon delivered a line that made Austin visibly break character and laugh in the ring. Then on October 19, McMahon followed through and fired Austin on live television. Austin responded by kidnapping McMahon, forcing him to his knees in the center of the ring, and holding what appeared to be a real gun to his head. When Austin pulled the trigger, flag reading Bang 316 popped out. McMahon, having believed the gun was genuine, lost control of himself completely on national television. The segment ended with Shane McMahon revealing he had already rehired Austin, making the entire firing pointless. 4 consecutive weeks, each one more unbelievable than the last. This was the product that WCW could not compete with. That vacant championship created the context for the creative peak of the entire year. Survivor Series on November 15 in St. Louis was presented as Deadly Game. For the first time in 10 years, the WWF Championship would be determined in a single elimination one-night tournament. The structure of the event was a marvel of long-term planning. In the weeks before the show, the lovable and vulnerable Mankind had been built up as McMahon's protected corporate favorite, wearing a tuxedo and receiving obviously helpful booking. His first round opponent was a retired nobody named Dwayne Gill, and Mankind ended the match in 30 seconds. Meanwhile, The Rock was cast as the defiant underdog people champion, fighting every advantage the corporate machine could throw at him. His first round match lasted 3 seconds. Shane McMahon betrayed Steve Austin in the semifinals, preventing his pin and physically striking him to hand the match to Mankind. Then in the tournament final, as The Rock had Mankind trapped in the sharpshooter hold, McMahon ordered the referee to ring the bell. The match was stopped immediately. The Rock was declared champion even though Mankind had never submitted, never tapped out, never quit. It was a direct reference to the real betrayal of Bret Hart at the 1997 Survivor Series, and every person watching understood exactly what they had witnessed. Double turn was absolute. The Rock, the man the crowd had been passionately supporting as their rebellious hero all evening, revealed he had been working with the McMahons the entire time. He became the corporate champion. Mankind was left broken, betrayed, and deeply sympathetic. The corporation had its centerpiece, and professional wrestling had delivered something that felt genuinely cinematic and self-aware. The Deadly Game tournament remains one of the most perfectly engineered events the medium has ever produced. All of it together across that 1 year created something the wrestling industry had never seen before and has never fully replicated since. Every piece worked with every other piece. Every week escalated from the last. Every character had a clear reason to exist. The roster was deep enough that the main event, the secondary stories, and everything in between felt equally worth watching. That is exceptionally rare in any form of serialized entertainment. That is the reason people still come back to 1998 specifically. Not purely out of nostalgia, though nostalgia plays a role, but because what the WF built during that year was a genuine working blueprint for how episodic sports entertainment should feel when it is at its very best. Fast storytelling, authentic character, weekly escalation that made loyal viewing feel genuinely rewarding. A product so confident in itself that it did not need to remind you it was good. It just was. That blueprint still shapes decisions being made in professional wrestling every single week today. When modern promoters talk about building a must-watch weekly show, they are talking about what the WWF figured out in 1998. If this breakdown did justice to the year it covered, leave a comment below with your single favorite moment from 1998 WWF. Subscribe if you have not already done so, because there is a great deal more wrestling history coming to this channel. Thank you for watching, and thank you for caring about the greatest year in wrestling history.
Penthouse to the outhouse to the jailhouse. I had too much time and money in my hands, Chris. I had almost 3 years of guaranteed contract left with AOL Time Warner for a lot of money. And Vince couldn't touch me.
But could you
I
not
would have
have,
had to given up 3 years of guaranteed money. Yeah, but after that, everything happened. I got messed up on the wine, women, and song deal, and I had too much time and money on my hands, and got messed up on drugs and alcohol, and at a period where I was a complete train wreck.
Did he deserve it? That is the question sitting right underneath this video's title, and it is a fair one. WCW fired Lex Luger, and when the cameras went dark and the big money dried up, the man once billed as the total package ended up scraping through the same brutal blue-collar reality as the rest of WCW's forgotten giants. So before you answer that question, you need to know the full story. If you want more stories like this, tap the hype feature and give this video some hype. It helps a ton as we get into the wild part of his story. Here's what makes this more than just another wrestling fall from grace. Lex Luger was not just a mid-card guy who got lucky for a season. He was one of the highest paid athletes on cable television. He was physically sculpted into a walking billboard for a corporate empire. He had a guaranteed contract that kept paying him even after WCW was dead and buried. He was the kind of man that promoters built entire storylines around because his body alone sold tickets before he opened his mouth. And then in the space of about 4 years, he went from cashing million-dollar checks to facing 13 felony counts. Paralyzed from the neck down, stripped of more than 100 pounds of muscle, and dependent on caregivers just to survive a single day. That is not a cautionary tale. That is a collapse so total and so complete that it almost defies belief. It is the kind of story you could not write as fiction because nobody would believe you. So how does a man who sat at the absolute top of the Monday Night War end up at the very bottom of everything? And how, after all of that, did he find a way back when most people had already written him off completely? Let us start at the peak, because you need to feel what he had before you can understand what losing it meant. Lawrence Wendell Fole was a physical specimen by almost any standard. Standing around 6'4" and carrying roughly 265 pounds of muscle during his prime, Fole was not just built for wrestling, he was built for television. Ted Turner, the media mogul behind WCW, treated Fole's physique as a corporate asset, not a metaphor, an actual asset, the kind of thing you protect with a contract. And what a contract it was. During the Monday Night War years, WCW restructured how money worked in professional wrestling. While the WWF ran on a volatile system of pay-per-view bonuses and fluctuating earnings, WCW handed out multi-year guaranteed deals backed by the full financial weight of Turner Broadcasting. That meant you got paid whether you wrestled or not, whether you were injured or healthy, whether the show did strong ratings or tanked completely. You got paid. Fole had experienced life without that safety net during his first run with the WWF. For his marquee performance at SummerSlam in 1993, he received a flat payment of around $50,000. On top of that, he spent an entire summer traveling the country as the centerpiece of the Lex Express promotional tour, a massive national campaign built entirely around his image. He received zero base pay for any of that promotional work because he was not actively wrestling matches at the time. That experience told him everything he needed to know. When WCW came calling with a guaranteed deal in 1995, Fole did not hesitate. He made a surprise appearance on the very first episode of WCW Monday Nitro and instantly shifted the balance of power in the industry. It was a shot across the bow at McMahon, and it landed. The wrestling world woke up the next morning talking about it. By 1997, he had reached the absolute top. On August 4th of that year, at a live Nitro broadcast from Auburn Hills, Michigan, Fole defeated Hollywood Hulk Hogan by submission, using his finishing hold, the torture rack, to capture the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. That win ended Hogan's dominant 359-day title reign and produced one of the most electric crowd reactions in the history of professional wrestling television. The arena was completely unhinged. Over the full run from 1996 to 2000, Fole earned just under $4.8 million from WCW. His peak single year was the year 2000, when he pulled in over $1.3 million. These were guaranteed numbers, not contingent on ticket sales or pay-per-view buys, guaranteed, and he was not alone at that level. This was an entire ecosystem of men insulated from real financial risk by corporate money. That insulation felt like security. It was actually a very expensive trap that nobody warned them about while they were living inside it. Because when WCW began to collapse, it did not collapse slowly. It fell apart fast and it fell apart completely. The company lost $15 million in 1999, then $62 million in the year 2000. When America Online and Time Warner completed their massive corporate merger, the new executives running the company had no personal connection to the wrestling business and no reason to keep propping it up. In early 2001, a television executive named Jamie Kellner canceled all WCW programming on TNT and TBS. That decision made WCW functionally worthless to any outside buyer, because without TV distribution, the product had no platform. AOL Time Warner ended up selling WCW's trademarks, assets, and tape library to Vince McMahon's WWF for somewhere between $4 and $7 million. A fraction of what the company had been worth just a few years earlier. McMahon took the trademarks. He took the tape library. What he did not take was the remaining high-dollar contracts of WCW's top-tier stars: Fole, Goldberg, Kevin Nash, Sting. Their contracts stayed with AOL Time Warner, which then tried to negotiate lump-sum buyout settlements to clear the liability from their books. Fole had nearly 3 years of guaranteed money left on his deal. He turned down McMahon's discounted offer and chose to stay home and collect his full payout from Time Warner. In the short term, that made financial sense. In the long term, it cost him everything in terms of professional relevance. McMahon had already been carrying a long-standing resentment toward Fole for his sudden and unannounced jump to WCW back in 1995, a move that had embarrassed the WWF on national television. Add to that the physical conditioning concerns that had been following Fole since he missed Starrcade 1998 and much of 1999. And then add what happened at WCW's very last pay-per-view event, Greed, March 2001. Fole and his tag partner, Marcus Buff Bagwell, were booked in an 8-minute match designed to put over a rising young tag team named Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Hare. Fole and Bagwell complained backstage about how the match was laid out. When it came time to perform, they went into business for themselves. Palumbo and O'Hare squashed them in under a minute. And then Fole and Bagwell stayed down on the mat and oversold the finish for several minutes, in what agents and management backstage described as unprofessional conduct. In a business built on trust and reputation, that kind of move does not get forgotten. The people in that building that night remembered it for years. That moment destroyed whatever slim chance either man had of being brought into McMahon's promotion. Once Fole's Time Warner checks stopped coming, he was blacklisted, aging, and completely cut off from the only major wrestling company left in North America. There was nowhere else to land that came anywhere close to what he had built. Now, without the structure of a national promotion keeping him accountable, Fole's personal life in Marietta, Georgia began to deteriorate in serious ways. He was living on the tail end of his wealth, going through a marital separation, and dealing with escalating substance abuse. He entered into a volatile relationship with Elizabeth Hewlett, known to millions of wrestling fans as Miss Elizabeth. In April of 2003, that volatility became public. Fole was arrested and charged with misdemeanor battery after Hewlett suffered visible facial injuries and a head contusion during a physical altercation between them in their garage. 2 days after that arrest, he was arrested again, this time for driving under the influence after crashing his Porsche into another vehicle, with Hewlett in the passenger seat. Then came May 1st, 2003. Fole and Hewlett were having dinner together at their townhouse when she suddenly became completely unresponsive. Fole called 911 immediately and emergency services rushed her to Kennestone Hospital. She was pronounced dead at the age of 42. The coroner ruled her death an accidental overdose. The investigation found a lethal combination of prescription pain medication and alcohol in her system. Her blood alcohol concentration was 0.29, more than triple the legal limit. When police searched the townhouse, they discovered large quantities of controlled substances, including GHB. Fole was charged with 13 felony counts of possession of a controlled substance. He eventually pleaded guilty. He received 5 years probation, mandatory drug screening, and a fine. The tragedy permanently destroyed whatever remained of his public image and closed the door on any return to WWE television. And then, in 2007, his body gave out too. Right when it seemed like the worst was behind him, the most physically devastating moment of his life was still ahead. On October 19th of that year, Pohl was traveling on a commercial airplane when he suffered a sudden injury to his neck that triggered a rare medical event called a spinal cord infarction, a spinal stroke. The stroke cut off blood flow to his spine and caused massive swelling that extended from his C6 vertebra in his neck all the way down to his D5 vertebra in his chest. The result was immediate and total. Pohl was paralyzed from the neck down. For nearly a year, he remained in a quadriplegic state, completely unable to move his arms or legs. The prolonged immobility and nerve damage caused severe muscle atrophy. He lost more than 100 pounds of muscle. The man who had been presented to the world as a physical monument to human conditioning was now almost entirely reliant on medical equipment and caregivers just to get through each day. This is where the title of this video earns its meaning, because when you look at what happened to Pohl and to his peer Buff Bagwell in the years after WCW closed, you are looking at a structural failure that had nothing to do with personal weakness alone. Professional wrestlers in the 1990s worked as independent contractors. No collective bargaining agreement, no pension, no employer-sponsored medical insurance, no long-term disability coverage, nothing. The money that poured in during the peak years was real, but so were the legal fees, the divorces, and the cost of long-term medical care that came after. And when the money ran out, there was no institution behind them to soften the landing. Bagwell had earned over $1.3 million during his WCW run. After the promotion closed, his life declined sharply. A serious car crash in 2020 eventually led to the amputation of his right leg. To cover his ongoing medical expenses, Bagwell took a standard 9-to-5 job, repairing residential and light commercial air conditioning units for Nail Heating and Air Conditioning, a local HVAC company operating in the Atlanta area. The man who once performed in front of millions of people on primetime cable television was now showing up to fix your air conditioner on a Tuesday morning. And for those who could not find steady work, the independent autograph circuit became the financial fallback. Former primetime stars showing up to high school gymnasiums and small conventions put on by minor local promotions, selling their signature for $20 a transaction, covering rent and healthcare expenses, one handshake at a time. Men who had headlined pay-per-view events in front of tens of thousands of people were now sitting behind a folding table under a fluorescent light, hoping enough fans showed up to make the drive worth it. This is what the Monday Night War actually left behind for a lot of these men. Not a legacy etched in bronze, not a comfortable retirement, a grind. So did Lex Luger deserve it? Here's where the answer gets complicated, and where the story finally turns. In August of 2005, before the spinal stroke, before the worst of what was still coming physically, Pohl was sitting alone in a hotel room in the middle of what he would later describe as a severe personal crisis. He had a vivid nightmare of drowning at the bottom of a pond. He woke up from it differently than he had gone to sleep. Something about it cut through in a way that years of external consequences had not managed to do. He later described the experience as a spiritual awakening that finally showed him the emptiness of everything he had been chasing. On April 16, 2006, he attended a service at Clarkdale First Baptist Church. The pastor that morning preached from Matthew 7:24 through 29, contrasting a house built on shifting sand with one built firmly on rock. Pohl later said he recognized that everything he had built his life on had been shifting sand. He formally committed to faith that day. To mark the break from his past, he poured roughly $36,000 worth of vintage wine down the drain. That spiritual foundation held when his body gave out the following year. Rather than surrendering to the paralysis, Pohl leaned into rehabilitation with a discipline that mirrored the same intensity he had once brought to his physique. He partnered with former WCW World Champion Diamond Dallas Page, who had developed a specialized yoga-based physical therapy program, and the two worked together to push Pohl's recovery further than most people around him expected was possible. Through that work, Pohl regained enough mobility to stand briefly and take unassisted steps on camera. His close friend Steve Borden, known to fans as Sting, stayed near him throughout the recovery as a consistent source of support and personal grounding. The redemption continued in ways that went beyond just physical recovery. WWE, the company that had blacklisted him for years, eventually brought him back into the fold. Recognizing that Pohl had lived through virtually every consequence that the company's talent wellness program was designed to prevent, they hired him as a consultant and counselor for that program. He now works behind the scenes, sitting with young performers and using his own story to warn them about the same traps he fell into. Drug abuse, financial mismanagement, the seductive pull of personal pride that makes you think the money and the spotlight will never end. And then in 2025, it was made official. Lex Luger was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame as part of the class of 2025. Not as a relic of a failed era, not as a pity inductee, as a man who had survived things most people would not survive, rebuilt something real from the wreckage, and earned his place in the conversation about what this industry's history actually looks like. The same company that had written him off twice gave him a standing ovation. So back to the original question, did he deserve it? The honest answer is that some of it, yes, he absolutely brought on himself. The greed situation was a choice. The lifestyle that led to the tragedy with Elizabeth Hewlett was a series of choices. The arrogance that cost him his second chance with McMahon was a choice. But some of what happened to him was a system that chewed people up without providing any safety net on the other side. A system that handed young men millions of dollars with no financial guidance, no health coverage, and no plan for what came after. Luger was not alone in falling through that gap. He was just one of the more dramatic and visible examples. What separates his story from a lot of others is that he actually came out the other side, not whole, not without scars, not without a list of things he can never undo, but standing, literally and figuratively, and doing something useful with the damage, which is more than most people manage. If this story hit different for you, drop a comment below and let me know what you think of Luger's full career and his comeback. Like this video if you want more deep dives like this one, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. These stories deserve to be told fully and honestly, and there are a lot more of them waiting.
Well, Rick, he came in and they were going to, put him with me, and I never met him. He was very polite, very nice, and I just said, okay, well, here we go, and we worked similar.
Yeah.
I think he's 10 years younger than me, so he had more vim, more vigor.
How good was Rick Martel? That question sounds simple, but the moment you start asking the people who actually laced up boots beside him, the people who tried to outwork him night after night across arenas in 3 different decades, the answers you get back stop being simple very fast. Some people called him too pretty, too polished, too structured. Critics said his accent held him back. Promoters complained he was not drawing. One partner agreed so severe it poisoned everything they had built together. So on the surface, you could look at Rick Martel and think, yeah, sure, decent guy, decent worker, never the main event, never really the guy. And that version of the story exists. It has real names attached to it. It has specific accusations that were never taken back. But here is what is weird. The people who actually worked with him, the ones who stood across the ring from him or stood in his corner, kept landing on the same word. Safe. Not safe like cautious or careful. Safe like rare. Safe like something you only find in a handful of workers across an entire generation. And when legends were asked about Rick Martel, that word was just the beginning of what came pouring out. If this kind of deep dive content is your thing, tap hype on this video and give it a boost. It helps more than you know, and it tells us this kind of work is worth making. Now let us go through every major voice in reverse order, starting from the final chapter of his career and moving all the way back to where it all began. Number 1 is Jim Cornette. And if you know anything about Cornette, you know he does not hand out praise lightly. He is precise. He is historical. When Cornette talks about Rick Martel, he frames the legacy around 2 things. First is credibility as a traveling world champion. During Martel's AWA world title run, Cornette points out that Martel defended the championship internationally against diverse opponents across different styles and territories, never once letting the belt feel small. The second thing, and this is where Cornette gets loudest, is the heel turn. Cornette is direct about how difficult it actually is to go from beloved babyface to genuinely hated villain. Fans know you. They have cheered you for years. Martel did it by committing entirely to the absurdity of the model, wearing oversized buttons that said, "Yes, I am a model," spraying opponents with arrogance cologne and making every detail feel real. Cornette says that kind of character reinvention is what separates workers who are good from workers who are great. He also touches on the ending. In 1997, there was a plan to bring Martel back to the WWF as part of a tag team called the Supermodels with Don Callis. The idea was for Callis to eventually turn on Martel and move him back into a babyface role for the first time since 1989. A pay dispute with Vince McMahon ended that. Martel signed with WCW instead, had a well-regarded feud for the WCW Television Championship in 1998, then suffered a severe leg injury. He came back 5 months later in better shape than ever. In his very first match back against Stevie Ray, he suffered a career-ending neck injury. WCW used Bret Hart to write him out of the angle. But Cornette notes that Martel walked away without desperation. He had invested his money wisely as a real estate developer throughout his career and did not need wrestling to survive. He left the business on his own terms. And according to Cornette, that is the final mark of a man who did everything right. Number 2 is Bret Hart. Hart is one of the most technically demanding evaluators in the history of the business. He does not use words like smooth or safe without meaning every syllable. When Hart placed Rick Martel among the smoothest, most technically sound, and most physically safe workers he had ever shared a ring with, that was not a casual compliment from someone handing out praise to a friend. That was a certification from one of the most credible voices in wrestling. Hart's framing cuts through everything else said about Martel, criticism, the politics, the gimmick debates, and lands on the part that cannot be faked. You either protect your opponent, or you either know where you are in the ring at all times, or you do not. Martel always did. That level of spatial and technical awareness is the foundation of everything a professional wrestler is supposed to be. And Bret Hart saying it plainly about Martel tells you more than any highlight reel ever could. Number 3 is Shawn Michaels. The year was 1992. Michaels had just broken away from the Rockers and was still finding his footing as a singles star. He was nervous heading into SummerSlam 1992 at Wembley Stadium in London. The match had a strange stipulation. Neither man could hit the other in the face. His opponent was Rick Martel, and both men were entangled in a storyline where sensational Sherry was portrayed as being in love with both of them at the same time. Michaels later recalled feeling the weight of... He knew management was watching, wondering whether he was too small, whether he had the presence to carry a singles role long term. He credited Martel's veteran guidance with getting him through the performance. With no face punching allowed, they used wrist locks, comedic hair pulling, and roll-up reversals where each man kept pulling the other's tights, forcing the referee to break the count. The climax hit when Sherry faked a feint at ringside. Both men immediately abandoned the match and rushed to her side, fighting over who would carry her. It resulted in a double countout. The comedy continued backstage. Michaels was carrying Sherry until Martel knocked him down and stole her. Michaels got her back. Martel grabbed a bucket of water and dumped it directly onto Sherry, soaking her white dress and waking her up in a screaming rage. Michaels said working with Martel gave him the blueprint for the vain, narcissistic heel archetype that he would later build his career around. A veteran who knew exactly how to hold a comedic match together without ever losing the crowd. That was Martel. Number 4 is Jake Roberts. By late 1990, Martel had been the model for over a year, and the character needed a feud that could push the heat even further. It found one on the Brother Love show, when Martel sprayed arrogance directly into Jake Roberts' face and blinded him. Roberts wore white contact lenses to sell the blindness during segments, which actually left him unable to see anything. To generate massive heat for Martel, Roberts waited until they were in front of live crowds before intentionally tripping over objects and falling down, shouting about what had been done to him. Fans pelted Martel and anyone near him with garbage. Martel leaned into it, forming a team called the Visionaries at Survivor Series 1990, a name that was a cold, deliberate jab at Roberts' lost sight. All of it built toward the blindfold match at WrestleMania 7 in March 1991. Blindfold matches are almost always disasters. Two performers cannot see, the athletic flow dies, the crowd checks out. But Roberts and Martel turned it into a master. Roberts used pointing gestures to get fans screaming loud enough to guide him toward Martel's location in the ring. Roberts later called it the easiest money he ever made, but he was precise about why it worked. It worked because of Martel. His positioning, his timing, his spatial awareness. Roberts pointed out clearly that only a worker who was truly gifted and physically safe could have executed that match without injuring his opponent or letting it fall apart entirely. The match worked because of what Martel brought to it. Number 5 is Tito Santana. Nobody in this story carries more emotional weight about Rick Martel than Santana. After Tom Zank walked out on Martel in 1987, Santana, who was doing Spanish commentary at the time, ran down to save Martel from a post-match beating on August 15th of that year. That save started Strikeforce. Santana described it as one of his all-time favorite tag experiences. He said they clicked instantly because they shared the same values, the same belief in wrestling clean and fighting for the fans. The team name almost went a very different direction. Vince McMahon originally pitched Border Patrol for the duo. Santana pushed back hard, pointing out that real tragedies involving Hispanic migrants dying while crossing the Texas border would make that name deeply offensive and turn them into heels in the eyes of the public. McMahon agreed, and Strikeforce was using the Girls in Cars theme originally made for the Can-Am Connection. They won the WF Tag Team Championship in October 1987 by defeating the Hart Foundation, then lost the titles at WrestleMania 4 when Axe hit Martel in the back of the head with Mr. Fuji's cane while the referee was distracted. Martel then disappeared from programming. Public story was a neck injury. The real reason was that Martel had stepped away to care for his wife, who was seriously ill. Santana waited loyally. They reunited at the Royal Rumble in 1989 and headed toward WrestleMania Fever against the Brain Busters. During the match, Santana accidentally hit Martel with a flying forearm. Martel fell to the and then he come back. He walked out on Santana and turned heel in front of everyone, declaring that Santana was the dead weight holding them back. Santana called it a knife in the back, not just as a character, as a real person, because the trust between them was real. The feud ran across 45 documented matches from 1989 through late 1990. Martel won 25, mostly through shortcuts. Santana won 15. Martel pinned Santana first at Survivor Series 1989. Santana beat Martel in the King of the Ring tournament finals that same year. The crowd screamed traitor at Martel everywhere they went. And then the feud ended quietly, with no pay-per-view blow-off, no WrestleMania sick match. Santana was deeply frustrated by that and still is. He felt the audience had earned a proper ending. Number 6 is Tom Zenk, and Zenk is the hard part of this story. The Can-Am connection launched in late 1986. Martel and Zenk were visually identical, same physiques, same energy, same clean-cut appeal. The crowd loved them instantly, and they earned a match victory at WrestleMania the 3 in March 1987. But behind the scenes, something cracking. Zenk claimed that while he was still working in Montreal, Martel was already negotiating their WWF contracts with McMahon in secret. Martel reportedly told Zenk that a ship can only have one captain, making it clear that Martel would control the business side of the team. Zenk disputed that. He argued his own youth and appeal made up at least half of what the team was. He also claimed Martel told him they were making equal money when their pay scales were drastically different. Inside the ring, Zenk felt he was carrying the physical burden. He says he absorbed punishment in every match while Martel was protected, coming in on the hot tag to execute the flashy comebacks and finish things off. Zenk was clear that Tito Santana was never asked to carry that same burden. On July 9, 1987, Zenk walked out of the WF mid-feud with the Islanders. The WF blacklisted his name. He was referred to on television only as Rick Martel's former partner. The two never reconciled. Zenk died in 2017 with those grievances unresolved. Worth saying plainly, though, Zenk's accusations were about money, power, and structure. They were never about the in-ring work itself. That part was never in dispute. Number 7 is Stan Hansen. Hansen came at Martel from a completely different direction than anyone else on this list. He was a Southern and Japanese brawler who believed physical violence was not just part of wrestling, it was the whole point. He looked at Martel's polished, structured execution and called it too pretty, too clean. He recalled that AWA promoters and critics were constantly saying Martel was not drawing as champion, pointing to his French-Canadian accent and claiming he could not cut effective English promos. Hansen won the AWA World title from Martel at Night of Champions 2 on December 29, 1985. But here's what else Hansen said. Despite every criticism, he put Martel on a pedestal as a great white meat babyface. He named Martel alongside Tommy Rich as the absolute best at that specific role in the history of the business. Good-looking man who could sell and never die. That is Hansen's highest compliment. Their clash at AWA Superclash Chi on September 28, 1985 in front of 21,000 fans at Chicago's Comiskey Park lasted about 4 minutes and ended in a double disqualification after less than 2 minutes of actual ring action. Hansen threw heavy plastic chairs at Martel's head and back. He terrorized him with a bull rope and a loud cowbell. They fought through the crowd and down the concrete steps of the baseball dugout and out of sight. Martel absorbed it all and kept coming. The rivalry ended early due to political friction. Hansen grew frustrated with the AWA booking, feeling they were using his rough style purely to transition the belt rather than building him into real programs. When they tried to put the title on Nick Bockwinkel through him, Hansen refused and left the promotion entirely. Full potential of what they could have built was never realized. But what existed already showed something important. Martel's polish was never fragile. It was armor. Number 8 is Tony Gurria, and this is where everything began. Martel arrived in the WF in 1980 and was paired with veteran tag specialist Tony Gurria, a man who already had 3 championship reigns to his name, but was noticeably slowing down physically by that point and had limited range on the microphone. That combination left Martel carrying the athletic, physical weight of the team from day one. The younger man had to be both the workhorse and the draw at the same time. Gurria never had a problem admitting it. In shoot interviews, he openly credited Martel's explosive babyface energy, supreme conditioning, and pristine execution for making their title reigns consistent and reliable. He said Martel had a perfect dropkick, flawless mechanics, and an enthusiasm for performing that never seemed to fade no matter how deep into a touring schedule they were. Together, they won the WF Tag Team Championship twice, defeating the Wild Samoans on November 8, 1980, and dropping the titles to the Moondogs on March 17th, 1981. What came next is what sticks. The feud with the Moondogs through 1981 those matches turned in a bloody physical house show brawl. In one match, Gurria was bloodied and taken backstage, only to return with a bandaged head and attack with a wooden stick. In another, Martel came back with a bandaged arm and used Moondog Rex's own bone as a weapon. Martel moved through all of it without losing a step. That combination, the technical precision and the willingness to get genuinely rough when the match demanded it, is what Gurria kept returning to when he talked about his former partner. Martel was not just pretty wrestling. Tough wrestling that happened to look pretty. And when you line up all 8 of those voices, from Gurria all the way to Cornette, a clear picture forms. A man who carried his partners when protected every opponent he ever worked, who reinvented himself completely and made audiences believe in a new version without hesitation, who survived brawls with one of the most physically dangerous workers in the business and kept going, who made a blindfold match at WrestleMania into something people still talk about, who helped Shawn Michaels find the blueprint for the most entertaining character HBK would ever play. Frustrated Tito Santana deeply, not because the work was ever lacking, but because what they had together deserved a bigger finale than it got. How good was Rick Martel? The Legends answered that question every time they were asked. And the answer was, drop a comment below with your favorite Rick Martel moment and subscribe if you are not already. There's a lot more where this came.
And in defense of USA Today and some of the other papers,
Yeah.
I'm sure when the doctor was convicted, that's how they got your name. I wouldn't want to make it seem like they're making up the papers, LA Times.
Well, no, basically, I was one of the patients of this doctor, and then later on down the line, he got into all these other things. But a federal judge basically said, Hulk Hogan, you don't have to testify. This trial has nothing to do with you. So basically, what I'd like to do is, with all due respect, inform you and everybody else that's misinformed.
The dark truth behind WrestleMania 8 in 1992 is messier than most fans ever knew. The steroid scandal was just the surface. Underneath it was a company that was crumbling in real time. Legal investigations, sexual abuse allegations at the highest levels, a locker room full of rage, and a night that was supposed to feel like a celebration, but was actually one of the most desperate acts of damage control in wrestling history. On paper, WrestleMania 8 looked enormous. 70,000 fans packed the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis on April 5th, 1992. The card had Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Randy Savage, Sid Justice, Bret Hart, Roddy Piper, Jake Roberts, and The Undertaker all under one roof. 2 headline matches, massive star power, the kind of show that should have felt like the WF at its very peak. If you like this kind of behind-the-scenes wrestling story, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype. But in the days leading up to that show, the company was being torn apart from the inside. Pressure did not build slowly. It crashed down in the final week before the event. On April 2nd, the United States Department of Justice formally subpoenaed the WWF over illegal steroid distribution. One day later, on April 3, a woman named Rita Chatterton, the first female referee in company history, appeared on a national television talk show and accused Vince McMahon of raping her in his limousine back in 1986. And on April 4th, just one day before WrestleMania, McMahon's new World Bodybuilding Federation television program made its debut, which made the whole steroid problem even more visible at the worst possible time. 3 bombshells in 3 days, then the biggest show of the year. A company that had spent the 1980s building itself into a global brand was walking into its showcase event completely exposed. To understand how the company got there, you have to go back a little further. The mess started in June 1991 with the federal criminal prosecution of a doctor named George Zahorian. He was a urologist from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who had worked as an official ringside physician at WWF events. When the government built its case, they obtained Federal Express records showing that Zahorian had shipped packages of anabolic steroids directly to Hulk Hogan on 8 separate occasions in 1988. Another 34 packages had been sent straight to the WWF's unlisted headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. Zahorian was eventually convicted on 12 counts of illegal drug distribution and faced a potential 44-year prison sentence. Hogan was repeatedly named as a major customer during that trial. His lawyer worked to keep him off the witness stand by arguing that testimony would cause disproportionate damage to his public public image. The judge allowed it, but the damage was done regardless. The name Hulk Hogan was now permanently attached to a federal drug conviction in the public record. Hogan tried to clean things up himself. On July 16, 1991, he appeared on the Arsenio Hall show and told the audience he had only used steroids on 3 occasions, strictly for medical reasons to heal from injuries. That appearance turned out to be a disaster. Former WF star Billy Graham immediately launched a public media tour calling Hogan's claims lies, saying that steroid use was basically required to succeed under McMahon's system. The backlash forced McMahon to introduce mandatory steroid testing in November 1991. When the first results came back, McMahon himself admitted that roughly half the active roster tested positive. The physical results were obvious. By the spring of 1992, Hogan's physique had visibly shrunk. The body that had defined WWF's entire look through the 1980s was gone. With the Department of Justice now preparing a formal criminal indictment against McMahon, the company made a decision. Hogan, the single biggest symbol of the steroid era, had to disappear from television to reduce the company's public profile. But even before the steroid crisis fully exploded, a second catastrophe had already been unfolding. On February 26, 1992, a sports journalist named Phil Mushnick published an investigation in the New York Post about what became known as the Ring Boy scandal. The report focused on Mel Phillips, the WWF's ring announcer, who managed the teenage crew members hired to set up the ring at live events. The details were horrifying. A man named Tom Cole, who had started working for the WF at age 13 after running away from a single-parent home, came forward with allegations of serious sexual exploitation. Cole said Phillips had engaged in predatory behavior with him and encouraged him to recruit other vulnerable teenagers. The allegations also extended to Terry Joyle, who worked backstage as Terry Garvin. Cole said Joyle had repeatedly pressured him for sexual acts, using threats of blacklisting and job loss to force compliance. The accusations also touched Pat Patterson, one of the most powerful men in the company, and McMahon's closest creative partner. On March 2, 1992, Phillips, Joyle, and Patterson all resigned. On a later broadcast of Larry King Live, a retired wrestler named Barry Orton called in and accused Terry Garvin of sexually assaulting him back in 1978. The entire executive team had been gutted, and Patterson, who had run the gorilla position and controlled the live creative flow of WWF events, was gone. His absence left the booking team in complete disarray as they walked into the Hoosier Dome. Now, here is where the show itself starts to reveal just how much was held together with tape. For nearly a decade, wrestling fans had dreamed of one match above all others: Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. Hogan was the larger-than-life hero of the WF. Flair was the technical champion from the NWA and WCW territories in the South. When Flair left WCW in 1991 and signed with McMahon, even bringing the physical NWA championship belt with him, a WrestleMania main event felt inevitable. The company started building toward it right away. Bobby Heenan teased Flair's arrival at SummerSlam 1991. Flair then cost Hogan the WWF title at the Survivor Series. After Flair won the vacant WWF championship at the 1992 Royal Rumble, the dream match finally seemed real, but it never happened. The official explanation from the company was that the match did not draw well enough on the house show circuit during trial runs in late 1991 and early 1992. Business was down, pairing was not working, so they changed the main event. That explanation was a cover story. The real problem started with bad booking. Rather than giving fans clean, competitive action to build anticipation for a WrestleMania payoff, the WWF booked repetitive, frustrating finishes. Fans would watch Flair pin Hogan due to outside interference, only for a second referee to reverse it into a disqualification victory for Hogan. That bait and switch happened over and over. Fans booed, and instead of fixing the booking, management blamed the wrestlers. This was a pattern the company repeated constantly. When their own decisions produced bad results, they pointed at the talent, protected the people at the top, and left the performers holding the blame for problems they did not create. The style clash also made things harder. Hogan's formula was rigid. He was built to wrestle massive, slow-moving monsters. Flair was a technical, bump-taking champion who needed long matches, physical storytelling, and dirty tactics to make his opponents look good. Flair was not a giant. He was a peer. Hogan refused to adjust his approach, and the matches never found their rhythm. But the real wall was this. Because of the steroid scandal, Hogan was already scheduled to leave the company right after WrestleMania. If he was leaving, he could not win the WF Championship for Flair. But Hogan, using the massive political leverage he had built over a decade, also refused to lose cleanly to Flair, not on the biggest stage. Neither man would take the clean loss. That made the match impossible to book. It became what insiders called booking poison. There was also a promise to keep. When Sid Udy, known as Sid Justice, was signed away from WCW in 1991, Vince McMahon had personally guaranteed him the main event spot at WrestleMania 8. With Hogan leaving and the Flair match dead, McMahon honored that promise. Hogan would wrestle Sid in a non-title match. The returning Ultimate Warrior would bridge the gap as the company's next top star. So McMahon had a main event that was not a title match featuring a departing star. Marketing machine had to make that sellable. What they came up with was cynical but effective. They promoted the Hogan and Sid match as Hogan's last match before retirement. The retirement tease was built to pull in fans who wanted to witness the end of an era. It was designed to generate a massive gate while hiding the truth, which was that Hogan was not retiring on his own terms. He was stepping away because the federal government was circling and the company needed distance from its most famous face. To sell the illusion harder, the WWF produced a serious interview segment in the style of a news magazine program. McMahon sat across from Hogan and asked him pointed questions about his legacy, his future, and the emotional weight of walking away. Hogan played it straight, performing not as the cartoon superhero of the 1980s, but as a vulnerable man preparing to say goodbye. The segment worked. It redirected attention from courtrooms and accusations toward nostalgia, but that reframing came at a cost. For the first time in WrestleMania history, the WWF World Heavyweight Championship match was not the main event. Flair versus Savage, a title match, was pushed to the middle of the card. A non-title grudge match closed the show. Championship prestige was being sacrificed so that one man's exit could be packaged as a heroic farewell. Then the main event itself fell apart on live television. Because Hogan refused to lose cleanly, and because a clean pin for Hogan would destroy Sid's value as a villain, finish was booked as a disqualification. The plan was specific. Hogan would hit his big boot and his running leg drop. Before the referee could count to 3, a character named Papa Shango, a voodoo-themed heel played by Charles Wright, who had only debuted 2 months earlier, would sprint down the entrance ramp and attack Hogan to trigger the disqualification. Sid would be protected, Hogan would leave unbeaten, plan fell apart in real time. There was a severe communication breakdown backstage. Papa Shango did not get his cue. Hogan hit the leg drop and went for the cover. Papa Shango was nowhere near the ring. Sid improvised, kicked out of the leg drop at the count of 2. That was a massive deal. That move had been treated as completely unstoppable in 1980s wrestling logic. Almost nobody had ever kicked out of it. Sid doing it, because of a backstage timing error, broke something that had been sacred for years. And the crowd did not know exactly what had gone wrong, but they could feel it. The moment had no weight. The tension collapsed. What was supposed to be an emotional farewell to the biggest star in company history looked like a mess. Sid's manager, Harvey Whippleman, then ran onto the ring apron and physically grabbed the referee to force an awkward disqualification call. Finally, Papa Shango came jogging down the ramp well after the bell had already rung and joined Sid in a flat, joyless beatdown. The whole segment looked like exactly what it was. A plan that had broken down in front of 70,000 people. Hogan was visibly furious on camera. Backstage accounts confirmed there was an explosive confrontation immediately after the match, with Hogan directing his anger at the production staff and the performers for ruining his send-off. It was a chaotic end to one of the most famous careers in wrestling history, and it happened because the machine had too many moving parts and not enough people left to hold them together. That breakdown at the top of the card mirrored what had already happened earlier in the night. Hours before the show started, Jake Roberts cornered McMahon backstage. Roberts had spent over a year being told he would transition into a backstage creative and agent role once his in-ring run wound down. As WrestleMania approached, McMahon rejected the request, reportedly citing Roberts' ongoing problems with substance abuse. Roberts was furious. He issued an ultimatum right there in the building. Either McMahon granted him an immediate release from his contract, or Roberts would refuse to go to the ring and leave The Undertaker without an opponent on a live pay-per-view. McMahon had no time to find a replacement. He had no choice. He gave in. Roberts went out, performed as scheduled, and took a clean loss to The Undertaker in front of the live crowd, with none of that tension visible on screen. Then he walked out of the company permanently that same night. His relationship with the promotion severed for good. Then came the moment that was supposed to save the main event. After the disqualification finish left the crowd flat, the Ultimate Warrior's music hit and he ran to the ring to make the save. The return was meant to signal the beginning of a new era. Warrior had been suspended the previous summer after a financial dispute, and McMahon planned his comeback as proof that someone new was ready to carry the company. But it did not land as intended. Warrior had dropped a significant amount of muscle mass to comply with the new drug testing policy. He came back noticeably smaller. His hair was shorter. His facial appearance had shifted. The contrast was stark enough that it triggered one of the most persistent urban legends in wrestling history. Millions of fans became convinced the original Ultimate Warrior had died and been replaced by an imposter. The fact that the WWF had previously used look-alike characters for both The Undertaker and Diesel made the suspicion feel believable. Instead of marking a triumphant new beginning, Warrior's return became a distraction wrapped in conspiracy theories. Earlier in the night, the show had also revealed the company's habit of treating people differently depending on how useful they were. The storyline around Savage defending the title against Flair was built on an ugly premise. The creative team used the real-life fact that Savage and his wife Elizabeth were privately separated and heading toward divorce as material for a television feud. Flair was presented as a former lover of Elizabeth, and doctored photographs were used as props. Both performers were forced to work through deeply personal pain for rating. That same match also exposed the hypocrisy in how rules were applied. The WWF had a strict ban on blading. Flair bladed visibly during the championship match. McMahon screamed at production staff, fined Flair several $1,000s. But earlier that same night, Bret Hart had also bladed during his Intercontinental Championship match against Roddy Piper. Hart executed the cut carefully and quietly. To protect him from punishment, Hart and Piper staged a fake fierce brawl in the backstage hallway right after the match, making it look like Hart's blood had come from an accidental hard-way cut rather than a deliberate blade. Management accepted it. Hart was never fined. Same rule. Two completely different outcomes based on who was involved and how valuable they were. That double standard captured something very real about how the whole company operated at every level. WrestleMania 8 in 1992 was not a creative triumph. It was a mask. 70,000 people in Indianapolis saw bright colors and famous music and the spectacle of a giant show. What they did not see was a company being subpoenaed 3 days earlier, its top executives forced out weeks before, its biggest star fleeing a federal investigation, and its live event nearly derailed by a veteran performer issuing demands in a hallway hours before showtime. The main event chaos was the most honest moment of the whole night. The WWF slowly and reluctantly began pushing smaller, technically skilled performers who could pass a drug test. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were waiting. April 5, 1992 was the night the old era died. And yet, for all the ugliness behind the curtain, the show still produced wrestling that mattered. The fans in that building and at home had no idea what was happening in the hallways. They just watched the matches. And even with all of that rot underneath it, fans still got real moments on that card. Savage and Flair delivered a match that people still talk about. Hart and Piper gave the crowd something genuinely excellent. The night pointed, even if painfully and messily, towards something better. The next era of wrestling would be built on skill, craft, rather than size and spectacle. It just took a disaster of this scale, this public and this damaging, to force the company to finally get there and make changes it should have made years earlier. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what other backstage stories you want us to cover next.
Man, the thing with Chris is just, it's something that still bothers me. I know exactly what happened. I think, I think that he was texting me after everything really happened, after everything went down, after the passing of his, I'm trying to say it as PC as possible.
Sure.
Passing between his wife and his son. He was texting me going, "Hey, this is how you can find me." I think he texted me probably right before he committed suicide.
The truth behind his death is evidence. We are going to follow the science and the truth wherever it leads, without flinching and without excusing. If you appreciate deep, careful storytelling like this, tap the hype feature and give this video some hype so more people have a chance to see it. It only takes a second, and it genuinely helps stories like this one reach the people who to hear them. The answer to what truly happened is not written in a police report. It is written inside the damaged tissue of a brain that had been quietly dying for over 2 decades. A brain subjected to thousands of impacts, never properly treated, never formally tracked, operating inside a culture that rewarded toughness and punished vulnerability. And when you understand what was happening inside that skull, the story does not begin here. It becomes more devastating, because the man who did those things was not the man the world knew. He was what remained after that man had gradually, silently erased. Let us go back to where it started. Chris Benoit began his professional career in 1985 in Calgary, Alberta. He trained under Stu Hart in a basement gym known simply as the Dungeon, one of the most physically demanding training environments in the history of the sport. He wrestled for Stampede Wrestling and modeled his entire style on Thomas Billington, known to fans as the Dynamite Kid. Aggressive, compact, a style built on the idea that every move should look like it genuinely hurt, because many of them genuinely did. Central to that style was a signature move called the diving headbutt. Benoit would climb to the top rope, launch himself into the air, and crash headfirst down onto a lying opponent and onto the canvas below. The first time he attempted it, he knocked the wind completely out of himself. He kept using it anyway. For over 20 years in arenas across Japan, through Extreme Championship Wrestling, and eventually across the full run of his WWE career, he drove his skull into the mat and to other human beings night after night for 2 straight decades. His career spanned 22 years. Over that time, he sustained countless concussions. Most of them were never recorded, never treated, never formally documented. The professional wrestling culture of that era had one rule for injury: you work through it, you get back up. There was no medical timeout. There was no independent doctor waving off a performer because of symptoms. You finished the match, you went to the next town, and you did it again the following night. His father, Michael Benoit, later stated that while his son complained of concussions on a regular basis, no formal medical records or league-mandated injury logs tracked a single one of them. There was no protocol, no oversight, no protective system of any kind. On top of the head trauma, Benoit also suffered a severe neck injury that required spinal fusion surgery. His body was not just absorbing damage. It was storing it, building it, compounding it across decades with nowhere for it to go. Thousands of subconcussive and concussive impacts. Silent. Invisible on any scan. Accumulating in a way that would only become visible to science after it was far too late. 4 days after his death, on June 28, 2007, a man named Christopher Nowinski reached out to Benoit's father. Nowinski was a former WWE performer who had transitioned into advocacy work and founded the Sports Legacy Institute after suffering his own career-ending concussion. He asked if the family would allow an analysis of Chris's brain. They agreed. The examination was led by Dr. Bennett Omalu, a forensic neuropathologist who had previously identified a condition called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the brains of deceased NFL players including Mike Webster, Terry Long, Andre Waters, and Justin Strzelczyk. CTE is a progressive brain disease caused by repeated head trauma. It cannot be detected in a living person through any standard imaging. It is only confirmed after death by examining brain tissue directly under a microscope. What Dr. Omalu found in Chris Benoit's brain was described by the scientific community as catastrophic. Massive, widespread deposits of abnormal tau protein had spread throughout the brain. Tau protein normally plays a supportive role in brain cells function properly. When it becomes abnormal, it clumps into formations called neurofibrillary tangles and neuropil threads. These are the dead, collapsed remains of neurons, the actual cells that make up the functioning brain. Once they are gone permanently. There is no repair. Dr. Robert Cantu, one of the leading experts in sports medicine at the time, stated that Benoit showed the greatest concentration of abnormal tau protein of any athlete the Institute had studied up to that point. Destruction extended across multiple regions, including the neocortex, the limbic cortex, subcortical ganglia, the brainstem. Researchers also identified what are called ghost tangles, which are the faint outlines left behind after a neuron has fully disintegrated, the way a shadow remains on a wall after the object casting it has been removed. The regions most damaged were the ones responsible for memory, emotional regulation, decision-making, and impulse control. These were not peripheral areas. These were the command centers of the personality, the parts of the brain that make a person recognizable as themselves. And in Chris Benoit, those areas were not merely damaged, they were overrun. The scientific community did not all reach identical conclusions, and that debate is important. Dr. James Kelly of the University of Colorado raised a significant question. The planning and deliberate pacing of the events over 3 days seemed inconsistent with the impulsive violence typically associated with CTE. He argued that steroid-induced psychosis may have been a more direct contributing factor. Barry Jordan of the New York State Athletic Commission noted that Benoit's brain lacked amyloid deposits that some researchers associate with classic CTE and raised the possibility of frontotemporal dementia. Robert A. Stern of Boston University responded by clarifying that CTE is a distinct progressive condition that does not require amyloid deposition for diagnosis. And Dr. Omalu defended his findings by pointing to one specific area of the brain where the destruction was most consequential, the limbic system. This is the region that governs emotions and behavioral control. It is what allows a person to feel an impulse and then stop. It is the biological brake. When the limbic system degenerates, a person does not simply become more volatile. They lose the hardware required to regulate themselves at a biological level. Executive function, the mental system that allows us to reason, plan, and override destructive impulses, collapses. Behavior becomes disconnected from consequence. Decisions become irrational in ways the person may not even recognize, because the system that would flag the irrationality has already shut down. The person is not choosing to ignore reason. They have lost access to it entirely. Now add the chemistry. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation Toxicology report showed that Chris Benoit had approximately 10 times the normal level of testosterone in his system at the time of his death. The media seized on that number and ran straight to the roid rage, but medical experts directly challenged that explanation. Dr. David Black of Aegis Sciences Corporation made an argument that is hard to dismiss. Steroid-induced rage is explosive and short-lived. It erupts and burns out. It does not produce a calm, methodical 3-day timeline with phone calls and voicemails and carefully arranged crime scenes. The testosterone level was consistent with replacement therapy prescribed by his personal physician, Dr. Phil Aston, who was later prosecuted improperly dispensing drugs. Beyond the testosterone, Benoit also had Xanax and hydrocodone present at therapeutic levels. He was negative for alcohol. Nancy had therapeutic levels of Xanax, hydromorphone, and hydrocodone in her system, along with elevated alcohol that forensic investigators noted may have been partially caused by post-mortem decomposition. Daniel had an extremely high level of Xanax for a child, high enough to have left him deeply sedated and likely unconscious. That is the forensic reason there were no defensive injuries on him. He was not awake to resist. When a brain already destroyed by CTE, already stripped of its ability to control impulse and regulate emotion, is then operating under high testosterone, chronic pain-killing medication, and sedative substances simultaneously, the result is not simply a man who snapped. It is a mind that has lost the physical infrastructure required to process reality in any coherent way. Paranoia, dissociation, a complete fracture from rational thought that a healthy brain would correct automatically. Benoit's brain could no longer perform that correction. Now the final 48 hours. On the evening of Friday, June 22, Chris Benoit killed his wife Nancy in the bonus room of their home. Her limbs had been bound with coaxial cables and duct tape. She was strangled with a cord while Benoit pressed his back for leverage. There were no signs of a struggle. Her body was wrapped in a blanket. A Bible was placed beside her. On the morning of Saturday, June 23, Benoit gave Daniel an incapacitating dose of Xanax, leaving the boy deeply unconscious in his bed. He then suffocated his son. Like his mother, Daniel was wrapped and left with a Bible placed beside him. Those Bibles are not incidental details. Researchers who studied the case described their placement as a textbook sign of severe organic brain damage, a dissociative state in which the person is impulsively trying to impose order, peace, and spiritual meaning onto a reality they can no longer process in any rational way. It is a broken mind attempting to make something feel sacred because the ordinary frameworks for understanding what is happening have completely disintegrated. Later that Saturday afternoon, Benoit began making contact with the outside world. At 3:30 in the afternoon, he left a voicemail for fellow wrestler Chavo Guerrero, claiming Nancy and Daniel had food poisoning and that he would be late for a WWE event in Beaumont, Texas. A normal excuse. A mundane story. The kind of thing anyone might say. When Guerrero called back, Benoit sounded tired and groggy. At 3:44, Benoit called again, mentioning he was changing his Delta flight. He ended the conversation with a deeply emphasized goodbye, telling Guerrero he loved him in a way Guerrero would later describe as intensely off. It was not a casual farewell. It landed differently. It stayed with Guerrero in a way he could not explain until later. Benoit also separately told a co-worker that Nancy and Daniel were vomiting blood. In the early hours of Sunday, June 24, between 3:51 and 3:58 in the morning, 5 text messages were sent from both Chris and Nancy's phones to Chavo Guerrero and to referee Scott Armstrong. 4 messages contained the home address. The 5th stated that the dogs were in the enclosed pool area. The garage side door was open. Think about what that means. 2 people were already dead. And in those final hours, the thing occupying his attention was making sure the dogs would be found safe and that someone would come. He was not fleeing. He was not hiding. He was arranging, tying off loose ends with the detached logic of a mind that had already left the ordinary world entirely. He ensured the dogs would be safe. He ensured the bodies would be found. Then he walked to his basement weight room, removed the pull bar from his lat pull-down machine, fashioned a noose from the high-tension cable, placed it around his neck to the weights. When WWE learned of the deaths on Sunday, Monday Night Raw was dedicated as a 3-hour tribute, broadcasting career highlights and testimonials from peers. Then the forensic details came out. WWE immediately pulled the broadcast from international markets and began a total corporate erasure of Benoit's legacy. His history was removed from the website, his name stopped being spoken, his footage was locked away. What followed reshaped the entire sport. The United States House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform launched a federal investigation. Vince and Linda McMahon were summoned to testify about drug policies and industry. What Congress uncovered was damaging. WWE had launched a wellness program in February 2006 following the sudden death of Eddie Guerrero, but it had been applied with serious inconsistency. Roughly 40% of the roster had tested positive for various unprescribed drugs at some point. A current New York State investigation into a pharmacy called Signature Pharmacy that had been supplying wrestlers added further pressure. In August 2007, 11 prominent wrestlers were suspended simultaneously. That moment marked the end of an era. The deeper transformation came from the brain science. In December 2008, WWE partnered with the Impact Concussion Management Program, establishing mandatory annual baseline cognitive for every contracted performer. Before that program existed, there was no baseline to compare against. A wrestler could absorb a serious head impact, and no one had a scientific reference point for how their brain was supposed to function. That changed entirely. Any wrestler showing concussion symptoms is now immediately removed from competition, cannot return until passing an independent neurocognitive examination. WWE also banned the practice of striking opponents in the head with folding metal chairs, enforcing strict fines and suspensions for violation. These reforms saved real lives almost immediately. In August 2007, a routine cardiac screening mandated by the new wellness policy identified wrestler Montel Vontavious Porter, known as MVP and the reigning United States champion, as having a condition called Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. It is a potentially fatal heart abnormality. It had gone completely undetected entire career. The new screening caught it. It was treated. MVP is alive because of reforms that came directly at the darkest moment in the sport's history. The truth behind Chris Benoit's death is not simple, and it was never meant to be. The acts committed in that house are inexcusable. Nothing about the brain science softens what was taken from Nancy and Daniel. Nothing makes those losses acceptable. Nothing restores what a 7-year-old boy never got to become. But Nancy's sister, Sandra Toffaloni, has spoken publicly about her own long and difficult journey toward forgiveness and her reconciliation with David Benoit, Chris's eldest son. For years, the family was broken. Grief ran in different directions. Through a shared understanding of the medical reality at the root of what happened, they began to rebuild. Chris Benoit was a man whose brain had been quietly destroyed over 22 years inside an industry with no systems to detect the damage, no culture that permitted stopping, and no understanding of what repetitive head trauma does over a lifetime. He was a victim of an occupational disease that erased the part of him capable of making a different choice. That fact does not erase his crimes. It explains them in a way nothing else could. His death forced the world to take head trauma seriously. It changed how wrestling, football, and contact sports around the world approach brain health. It put the language of CTE into the public conversation years before it would have gotten there otherwise. It gave researchers a platform to speak and gave lawmakers a reason to act. It gave future athletes a layer of protection they would never know they needed and may never know they received. The darkness of Fayetteville became the catalyst for reforms that have protected and saved real human beings, and that is the part of this story that belongs to the future. That is the truth behind his death. If this kind of storytelling means something to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below with whatever this brought up for you. This is a heavy story, and there are no easy answers inside it. We read every comment, and we genuinely want to hear what you think.
The brief version of it is Hogan was in on it, Bischoff was in on it, everything you saw was agreed upon. Hogan went home and read the internet of how everybody believed it and everybody bought into it, and Vince Russo finally put Hulk Hogan in his place. All that stuff pissed Hulk Hogan off. The next thing you know, I'm getting sued for defamation of character, and Hogan and Bischoff are claiming they knew nothing about the promo or anything I was going to do.
3 words. That is all it took to define one man's entire career, his entire legacy, and honestly, his entire approach to the wrestling business. I can't lose. Not a catchphrase, not a slogan, a business strategy. Right now, in 2025, Hulk Hogan's face is printed on beer cans sold across America. His branding sits on the ring mat corners of Monday Night Raw as it streams on Netflix to millions of people worldwide, and WWE itself owns a piece of his company. The man has not wrestled in years, but the money is still flowing. Ask yourself how that happens. By the way, if you like deep dives like this, hit the hype feature on this video so more wrestling fans see it, and let us get into what really happened, because the story behind all of that modern money is not a story about charm or luck. It is a story about a man who looked at the wrestling business and decided decided he was not going to play by anybody else's. Was Hulk Hogan a selfish villain who killed careers and choked the life out of younger talent? Or was he the first wrestler to treat this whole thing like business chess, protecting a brand worth millions while everyone else was still thinking about the next town? That is what we are going to dig into today, and the answer is a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting than most give credit. Before we get into the specific moments, we need to understand how the wrestling business actually worked. Without that context, nothing Hogan did makes any sense. For decades before Hogan came along, the promoter ran everything. The promoter owned the television deal. The promoter owned the championships. The promoter decided who won, who lost, who got pushed, and who got buried. The talent showed up, did what they were told, and collected whatever paycheck the promoter decided to hand them. The performers were treated like equipment. Use them hard, run them down, replace them when they break. Nobody questioned it because nobody had the power to question. In that system, losing a match was not just a story beat. It was a financial transaction that moved value from one performer to another. If a company could force a top star to lose clean to a mid-card guy, that top star's merchandise sales would drop. Their ability to draw a crowd to arena would shrink. Their leverage in the next contract negotiation would weaken. Losing professional wrestling business was genuinely and directly tied to power. Hogan understood this better than almost anyone, and he acted on it. He recognized that his physical body was a limited resource, but the Hulk Hogan brand, the character, the icon, the red and yellow, the leg drop, that was a permanent asset with real financial value. Protecting that asset was not ego, it was smart business. Now, let us walk through the key moments that showed this in action, and we are going to do it in reverse order of where things stand today, working backwards through the most recent and most revealing events first. Number 5, SummerSlam 2005 and the Shawn Michaels protest. It is 2005, and Shawn Michaels is one of the greatest performers to ever lace up a pair of boots. He approaches Hogan with a genuinely smart idea. 3-match series, the kind of thing that would run all the way to WrestleMania and make both guys a mountain of money. Michaels lays out the plan clearly. Michaels wins the first match, Hogan wins the second. Hogan wins the blow-off at WrestleMania. Clean, fair, generous even. He also wants to keep it babyface versus babyface. 2 good guys competing on pure athletic terms. On paper, this is a perfect deal for everyone involved. Hogan dismantles every part. He insists on a classic heel versus babyface structure, which forced Michaels to turn villain for the program. And then, just before SummerSlam, Hogan pulls out of the multi-match idea entirely. Bad back, bad knee. Whatever the stated reason, the result is the same. 1 match. Hogan wins. Clean, center of the ring, no rematch, no rubber match at WrestleMania, no chance for Michaels to even the score. So Michaels, being Michaels, finds a different way to respond. He shows up to SummerSlam, and he puts on one of the most talked about performances in pay-per-view history, and not for the reasons performance talked about. Every single time Hogan throws a basic move, a clothesline, a simple chop, Michaels goes flying across the ring like he got hit by a freight train, backflips over the turnbuckles, flopping across the canvas, making Hogan's offense look so absurdly powerful that it tips over from impressive into cartoonish. It is a silent protest delivered in real time to a live crowd. The internet absolutely loves it. Hogan takes the win, plays to the crowd, and goes home. But the next night on Raw, Michaels delivers a sarcastic promo mocking every inch of Hogan's ring work. At that point, Hogan uses his political connection to Vince McMahon to shut the whole program down. No rematch, no redemption arc for Michaels. The chapter closes with Hogan holding an undefeated record against one of the most gifted performers of the modern era, and his brand entirely intact. Critics call it insecurity. The Ledger tells a different story. Number 4, Bash at the Beach 2000 and the courtroom aftermath. By the year 2000, World Championship Wrestling is bleeding badly. Ratings are collapsing. Pay-per-view buy rates are cratering. Vince Russo, the head of creative, decides the answer is a massive burn the old names down, build the new guys up, shock the audience into paying attention again. His version of the wrestling business is built on chaos, surprises, and rapid-fire storytelling. His version of Hulk Hogan involves Hogan losing the WCW World Heavyweight Championship to Jeff Jarrett. Hogan uses his creative control clause and says no. He flat out refuses the finish. So Russo engineers a workaround that is genuinely one of the strangest moments in wrestling history. The match starts. Jeff Jarrett walks to the ring, gets to the center of the canvas, and lies down, just lies there. Russo throws the championship belt in. He screams at Hogan to make the cover. Hogan, realizing he has been cornered in front of a live audience with cameras rolling, steps in, pins Jarrett, takes the belt, and walks out of the building believing he will come back as the babyface champion in the next chapter of the storyline. He does not come back. The moment Hogan leaves the arena, Russo grabs a microphone and delivers an unscripted tirade. He calls Hogan a politician who does not care about the company, declares the championship win worthless, promises the audience they will never see Hogan again, and immediately books a brand new match for the vacant title. Just like that, Hogan's win is gone, erased. The whole thing wiped from the storyline before the night is even over. Hogan responds by filing a lawsuit, defamation, false light invasion of privacy, breach of contract. The case, known as Balea versus World Championship Wrestling, Inc., goes to the Georgia Court of Appeals. The court dismisses the defamation claims because Russo's rant happened in the context of a professional wrestling broadcast, and the court decides that kind of hyperbolic commentary cannot be reasonably interpreted as factual statements. But the breach of contract claim is allowed to move forward. Court looks directly at the language of Hogan's creative control clause and makes a ruling that still matters to this day. The court says that control over the outcome of a wrestling match is worthless if half an hour later, outcome is totally changed. Creative control, the court establishes, has to extend to what happens after the match, too. A win that can be erased in a promo is not really a win at all. That legal precedent, born out of one chaotic night in Daytona Beach, became a foundational text for how talent protection clauses are written in wrestling contracts going forward. Number 3. Starrcade 97 Finish Chaos. If there is one moment that defines how far Hogan's backstage power actually reached, it is Starrcade 97. 18 months. That is how long World Championship Wrestling spent building toward this one match. Sting, the silent vigilante in the black and white face paint, had spent the better part of a year and a half perched in the rafters of arenas, watching the NW run roughshod over everything WCW held dear. The company needed this payoff. The fans knew everything was supposed to culminate here, with Sting finally defeating Hollywood Hogan and proving that the soul of WCW would not be bought, bullied, or buried. The plan backstage was detailed. Hogan would dominate most of the match. Referee Nick Patrick would then count a deliberately fast and crooked pinfall, giving Hogan a technically disputed win. Bret Hart, who had just signed with WCW after the infamous Montreal screwjob in the WF, would run out and protest the corrupt officiating. Hart would restart the match under fair conditions, personally referee Sting clean submission victory via the Scorpion Deathlock. Hogan gets protected because his loss comes with an asterisk. Sting wins clean in the restart. Everybody gets their moment. The crowd goes home satisfied. Here's what actually happens. Nick Patrick counts the pinfall at a completely normal speed. Not fast, not suspicious. It's a regular 3 count. Sting looks like he lost clean. Hart comes out anyway to restart the match, but because the first fall looked totally legitimate, the whole sequence makes no sense. The audience is genuinely confused. Sting wins the second fall, but the moment is scrambled. The 18 months of storytelling ends in a muddy finish that nobody can fully explain. Number 2, the WCW contract that made him untouchable. To really understand how Hogan dictate referee counts and override creative teams, you need to understand the contract that made it all possible. When Hogan arrived in WCW in 1994, his deal already included a formal creative control clause. But by 1998, after he had engineered one of the most talked about heel turns in wrestling history and helped build the NW into a phenomenon that pushed WCW past WF in the ratings for almost 2 years straight, his leverage was on a completely different level. He used that leverage to secure a contract that was less like a wrestling deal and more like a business partnership agreement. The guaranteed base salary was $4,450,000 per year, locked in for 3 years, regardless of injury, performance, or storyline direction. On top of that, a $2 million signing bonus paid within 14 days of execution, 15% of domestic pay-per-view cable sales per event, with a guaranteed floor of $675,000 per appearance, for at least 6 featured events per year, 25% of gross arena ticket revenue for every televised show he appeared on, 25% of gross ticket revenue for every live house show, 50% of all merchandise net receipts, 50% of all licensing fees tied to his name or likeness, $20,000 per month simply for wearing NW apparel on television during photo shoots. And at the very bottom of the list, a clause that made all the rest of it matter, full contractually protected veto over every match outcome finish. Think about what that combination actually means. Hogan is not collecting a paycheck. He is collecting a percentage of the business. His income is directly tied to how well the events he headlines perform. That means booking him into a losing storyline does not just hurt his character. It directly reduces the company's revenue, which directly reduces what Turner Broadcasting owes him under the terms of the deal. The finance department and the booking department are now in conflict the moment someone suggests Hogan loss. The contract itself becomes the creative protection. Nobody in that building can afford to write him as a loser because the losing would cost the company more than the story could ever be worth. The minimum guaranteed value of that deal, before any merchandise cuts, pay-per-view bonuses, or gate percentages, was $15,350,000 across the active performance years. WCW had no choice but to treat Hogan like the permanent main event because treating him any other way would have been financial suicide. Number 1, WrestleMania 9 shock. We go back to the beginning. April 1993, Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. The WWF is not in great shape. The company is dealing with an economic downturn across the entire wrestling industry and federal scrutiny from the Department of Justice. Vince McMahon has spent the past year pivoting away from the muscle-bound giants of the 1980s and building a new foundation around Bret Hart, a technically brilliant smaller wrestler who had won the WWF Championship and represented where the company was heading. The future in 1993 looks like Bret Hart. Hogan had left the WF in April of 1992. He comes back in early 1993 under a deal tied to a film project and a tag team run alongside his old friend Brutus Beefcake. The two form a team called the Mega Maniacs, and the story around Beefcake is genuinely emotional, built on his real-life recovery from a devastating 1990 parasailing accident that required major facial reconstruction. Hogan and Beefcake are supposed to work the tag team division. The world title, everyone is told, is not part of the plan. Then the commercial reality of the WrestleMania audience sets in. McMahon's new era talent is respected by the hardcore wrestling fan, but the casual, tourist-heavy crowd at Caesar's Palace does not move the box office numbers the way Hulkamania moves the box officers. International television buy rates are not where they need to be. Hogan makes his argument directly, putting him in the mid-card as a standard tag team wrestler permanently weaken the drawing power of the Hulkamania brand. The brand is product. The audience at Caesars needs the full version, not a watered-down side attraction. What happens at WrestleMania 9 is still one of the most analyzed finishes in the history of the business. Bret Hart is originally scheduled to retain the championship against the massive challenger Yokozuna. Instead, the night before the event, Hart is told the plan has changed. He loses to Yokozuna when the manager, Mr. Fuji, throws salt into his eyes. Hogan comes out to check on Hart. Fuji issues a spontaneous challenge. Fuji tries the salt trick on Hogan. Hogan ducks. The salt blinds Yokozuna instead. Clothesline, leg drop, pin, 22 seconds. Hogan is the WWF champion for the 5th time, and the crowd predictably goes absolutely wild. Inside the locker room, the reaction is the opposite of wild. Hart and his allies see this as an outright robbery. The guy they built the new era around just got publicly sidestepped on the biggest stage of the year. The passing of the torch match planned for SummerSlam, where Hart would defeat Hogan clean to cement the generational handoff, never happens. Hogan argues that a babyface versus babyface main event carries serious commercial risk. Fans would not know who to cheer, and the resulting fusion could damage both performers' value. Instead, at King of the Ring, Hogan drops the title back to Yokozuna through outside interference, walks out of the WF with his competitive record pristine, and heads toward WCW with his brand entirely undamaged. Hart still has a monster heel to defeat. Hogan still has a perfect calling card for his next negotiation. The math, however cold it looks, works in both directions. Here's what ties all of it together. Marvel Comics owned the legal rights to the name Hulk in the entertainment industry from 1984 to 2004. Every single match Hogan wrestled during that period earned Marvel a flat payment of $100 plus percentage royalties on merchandise, video games, and any external project using his name. 20 years of watching someone else collect off his most valuable asset. When he moved to WCW and turned heel in 1996, the Hollywood Hogan rebrand was not just a creative decision. It was a calculated move to build a separate sub-brand that Marvel's agreement could not touch. WCW paid him an additional $20,000 per month just to wear that name on television. He went from paying a royalty on the old name to collecting a fee on the new one. That understanding of brand architecture is the direct foundation for what exists today. Real American Beer launched in June of 2024, built entirely on Hogan's signature colors, his classic phrases, and the cultural weight of the icon he spent 40 years building. In January of 2025, WWE under TKO Group Holdings locks in a multi-year partnership. The Real American Beer logo goes on the ring mat corners of Monday Night Raw as it debuts on Netflix. WWE takes a minority ownership stake in the beverage. Hogan's brand, the thing he protected through every controversial for decades, is now generating revenue across one of the biggest streaming launches in sports entertainment history. So we come back to those 3 words. I can't lose. Some careers were stalled, some moments were complicated, some fans are still angry, and they have every right to be angry about specific decisions that affected specific people. Resentment in those locker rooms was real, and it did not come from nowhere. But here is what cannot be argued. Hulk Hogan looked at a business that was designed to consume its talent. He refused to be consumed, demanded a seat at the table, he got it written into contracts. He took it to court when those contracts were violated, and he proved to every athlete in every sport that your brand is not what your boss says is. It is what you protect it to be. The industry still runs on those rules: guaranteed contracts, revenue sharing, creative consultation rights, former partnerships with the company itself. All of it traces a line back to the era when one man in red and yellow looked at the wrestling business and decided that losing was a choice, not an obligation. The locker room feared him because he made the rules. And the rules, it turns out, outlasted everything else. If this kind of deep dive is what you are here for, like this video, subscribe so you never miss the next one, and drop in the comments which moment hit different for you. We read every single one.